Well, here we go with Cold Wars Part 7. Now, a second Cold War emerged after a decade of détente abruptly came to an end when the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and the capitalist leaders of the world worked together to defeat the expansionist motivations of the Soviet Union. In Moscow, Leonid Brezhnev's death in 1982 led to little change. Two old guard leaders ruled briefly and died one right after the other. Both were born before the 1917 Bolshevik Revolution. Then, in 1985, a new premier came to power, Mikhail Gorbachev, or Gorby as we like to call him. He was an energetic leader who enacted substantial reforms. To improve government performance, he encouraged glasnost, meaning openness. The Soviet Union reduced censorship and oppression, allowed free speech, and even some local democratic elections. Gorbachev also encouraged perestroika, meaning restructuring. This reduced the complexity of the Soviet bureaucracy. Some free market reforms were enacted, such as profit incentives and greater autonomy for farmers. But keep in mind, the Soviet Union still maintained their communist ideologies. Relations with the US improved dramatically, resulting in reduced defense spending. And what you see here is the Doomsday Clock. It was originally created as an analogy for global thermonuclear war back in 1947. The closer the clock was set to midnight, the closer the world would be to global disaster. Despite these changes, the economy and internal organization of the Soviet Union was breaking down. Further exemplifying Soviet inefficiencies was the nuclear meltdown at the Chernobyl power plant in 1986 near Kiev, Ukraine. It has been considered to be perhaps the worst nuclear power plant accident in history. The Chernobyl reactor number 4 exploded, the result of inadequate training leading to operator errors, as well as poor and outdated designs. Radioactive steam and waste was sent into the air. We'll probably never know the true numbers, but potentially thousands died either from the initial accident or from the cleanup later on. The plant today is covered by a concrete dome. Now, 1989 can be considered to be one of the most transformational years in human history. In that year, the Eastern Bloc crumbled after the Soviet Union, lacking the resources to control them anymore, allowed those countries the right to self-determination. What followed was a wave of revolutions leading to democratic reforms. For instance, in Poland, the Solidarity Organization was legalized. It was a free trade union and a political party. After free elections, they won 99% of the available parliamentary seats, and their leader, Lech Walesa, was elected president. Romania had never undergone de-Stalinization, and Nicolae Ceausescu was their brutal leader and dictator, who had terrorized his people through brutal suppression for a quarter century. After a brief revolution across several cities, Ceausescu and his wife, who was almost as brutal and powerful as he was, were tried and executed by a firing squad. And after almost a decade, the Soviet Union pulled out of Afghanistan, having suffered nearly 40,000 casualties. This war has been called their Vietnam. And one of the most iconic symbols of the Cold War, the Berlin Wall, was torn down, allowing people from East Berlin to freely travel to the West, paving the way toward eventual German reunification that would occur a year later. Eastern Europe wasn't the only region affected by this freedom movement. Over 100,000 Chinese citizens gathered and demonstrated at Tiananmen Square in Beijing. They were mourning the death of a pro-democracy leader while also requesting more freedoms. However, hardliners in the Communist Party resolved to use force, and hundreds of thousands of troops were sent in to halt the demonstrations and arrest anyone who resisted. We'll never know the true numbers, but some estimate around 5,000 people were killed in the government crackdown, and as a result, democracy essentially ended in China. By 1991, the Soviet Union was on the brink of collapse. In an attempted coup, Soviet hardliners arrested Gorbachev, but a politician named Boris Yeltsin rallied popular support, making a memorable speech from the top of a tank. The coup failed, and Yeltsin was hailed as a hero across the globe. Later, the Warsaw Pact was officially disbanded, and in December, the Soviet Union finally dissolved. In early 1992, all of the previous 15 states of the USSR declared autonomy, including Russia. They formed a loose association known as the Commonwealth of Independent States, the CIS. Even to this day, the newly formed republics have been called the Near Abroad by Russia, meaning they consider these states to be within Russia's sphere of influence and strategically vital for their existence. Boris Yeltsin served as the elected president of the Russian Federation, the first elected leader in Russia's history. The term New World Order was often used in the immediate post-Cold War years by leaders such as George Herbert Walker Bush. The world was relieved that the balance of nuclear terror would no longer determine the destinies of states. A sense of optimism followed for another decade, and the world was transformed from a bipolar world split between two camps anchored by the two superpowers to a multipolar world with the United States as a lone superpower, but with other dominant regions such as the EU, Russia, China, Japan, and other emerging world players.
That is correct.